Imagine a planet of desperate people praying for salvation, not from their human emperor or any benevolent deity, but from an oncoming swarm of ravenous aliens. It sounds unthinkable, yet in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40,000, entire populations do exactly that. They worship the Tyranids galaxy-devouring Xenos organisms as divine beings. In a universe rife with horrors, this is one of the most insidious and tragic. Welcome to the story of the Genestealer Cults, those who embrace the Great Devourer as their god and savior. What happens when an oppressed people comes to see their mortal predators as liberators? This is no cautionary fable. It is the horrifying reality on countless worlds where Genestealer cults take root. We'll delve into how these cults form, what twisted beliefs drive them, and ultimately, what fate befalls those who put their faith in the hunger of the Tyranids. Prepare for a journey into the underbelly of the Imperium, a journey of secretive rituals, doomed faith, and cosmic betrayal. Before we dive in, a quick note for newcomers. Tyranids are not your typical gods, far from it. They are an extragalactic species of predatory organisms, often likened to an endless swarm of space locusts that consume all life in their path. They don't negotiate, they don't have mercy, and they certainly don't seek worshippers. And yet, as we'll see, there are those who willingly or unwittingly offer up devotion to these creatures. If you're wondering, why would anyone worship something that wants to eat them? Keep listening. So let's pull back the curtain on the Genestealer cults, the hidden faith of the Great Devourer, and see exactly how the process unfolds from first contact to final apocalypse. Tyranids and Genestealers, the Devourer and its heralds. To understand this dark cult phenomenon, we must start with the beings at its core. The Tyranids themselves are a hive-minded alien race, a monstrous conglomeration of creatures engineered solely for consumption and evolution. They drift from galaxy to galaxy in bioships, stripping planets of all biomass. Think every plant, animal, and person, everything, to fuel their endless expansion. They are often called the Great Devourer, or the Hive Fleets. Worshipping them would seem as futile as praying to an oncoming tsunami. After all, one does not bargain with a tsunami. One is simply swept away. Yet the Tyranids have a vanguard organism perfectly suited to infiltrate and soften up potential prey worlds, the Genestealer. A Genestealer is a terrifying four-armed alien creature, fast and deadly, with razor claws that can pierce even Space Marine power armor. Crucially, Genestealers possess a unique weapon more dangerous than their claws. A form of Jinn tick infection. With a strike often termed the Genestealer's kiss, these monsters implant a fragment of their own Jinn tick material into a host. This is not a typical parasite. It doesn't incubate a chest-bursting larva. If you're picturing scenes from Alien, it's a fair comparison, but this is a bit different. Instead, the victim remains alive, changed, corrupted on a gene, tick, and mental level. The infected individual becomes a thrall to the Genestealer's will, even while outwardly they often appear normal. Unbeknownst to them, they develop an overwhelming compulsion to protect and spread the Genestealer's progeny. Over time, they will feel a familial, almost religious loyalty to the creature that infected them. And if that person later has children, well, those offspring won't be entirely human anymore. Thus begins a cult infection cycle that can span Jinn rations, slowly transforming a population from within. In simple terms, Genestealers are the infiltrating agents of the Tyranids. They are the heralds sent ahead of a hive fleet, like covert operatives preparing a target world for later consumption. A lone Genestealer might stow away on a trader's spaceship or drift to a planet aboard a derelict hulk. It only takes one to spark a catastrophe. Once it reaches a populated world, the creature slinks into the shadows and begins its dreadful work, hunting for victims to infect and indoctrinate. For example, the Imperium's first recorded encounter with Genestealers occurred on the moons of Imgal many centuries ago. At the time, Imperial scholars thought these creatures were just an isolated alien species dwelling in caves. They had no idea of the larger Tyranid threat that lurked beyond the galaxy. Only later did the truth emerge that Genestealers were the probing tendrils of something far greater. But by the time humanity learned this, Genestealers had already spread to countless unsuspecting worlds, sowing the seeds of cults wherever they went. It's worth noting how deceptively intelligent this Tyranid stratagem is. Rather than always attacking planets head-on, which Tyranids certainly do in great Hive Fleet invasions, the hive mind often sends these advanced agents to pave the way. Genestealers alone can't conquer a planet, but they can infect locals and create a hidden army of followers that will eventually do two things: undermine the planet's defenses and welcome the Tyranid gods with open arms. If this sounds like brainwashing mixed with a perverse religious cult, that's exactly what it is. The horrifying brilliance of the Genestealer cult phenomenon is how it turns a population against itself. The people come to revere the invaders. By the time the Tyranid Hive Fleet arrives in orbit, the world below is often already in chaos, even helpfully preparing itself to be devoured. Now that we've set the stage with the key players, the ever-hungry Tyranids and their Genestealer agents, let's see how a cult actually takes root among humans, or any other species unfortunate enough to be targeted. This is where things get truly interesting, blending biology, sociology, and twisted faith. Birth of a cult, infection, and infiltration. A Genestealer cult typically begins with a single shadowy incident, one creature and one victim. Picture a lonely outpost or a dingy alley in an overcrowded city on some far-flung Imperial world. Out of the darkness leaps the sinewy form of a Genestealer. The hapless victim, say a midnight shift cargo loader or a drifter in the slums, might get only the briefest glimpse of reflective eyes and glinting fangs before sharp claws hold them still. The Genestealer's tail or tongue delivers the so-called kiss, injecting alien Jin tick material into the victim's bloodstream. The entire encounter could be over in moments, leaving the victim alive and seemingly unchanged, at least at first. What follows is not a conventional infection or zombification. The host doesn't turn into a mindless husk. Instead, they gradually undergo a profound transformation in loyalty and psychology. The implanted Jin tick code rewrites parts of their biology and brain. Soon, that person will begin to feel a strange affection for the very creature that attacked them. They might remember the incident only hazily, perhaps as a religious vision or a near-death experience that opened their eyes. In truth, it has, just not in a good way. The infected individual becomes the first acolyte of a burgeoning cult, bound by psychic and Jin tick ties to the Genestealer. This bond is often called the brood mind or brood telepathy. The Genestealer, and later its spawn, exerts a subtle psychic influence, ensuring the infected host's absolute devotion. It's not mind control in the cartoon sense. The victim still has their personality and could be functioning in society, but their priorities and sympathies realign drastically. They now have an overwhelming drive to serve their new family and to protect the Genestealer at all costs. Emotionally, they often come to love the creature as one would a parent or a prophet. It's as if something deep in their soul is convinced that the Genestealer is a messiah or a divinely chosen leader. In those early days after infection, the lone Genestealer will hide in whatever dark corners it can find, perhaps in the city sewers, derelict buildings, or the depths of a mining site. The first cultist, the infected victim, will likely seek out their blessed attacker again. Imagine the confusion and compulsion. They may not fully comprehend why, but they feel a need to find that creature and protect it. And in the following weeks, they might lure a loved one or close friend to also share in the blessing by bringing them to the hiding Genestealer to be likewise infected. This is often how the cult starts, the first victim intentionally or unintentionally recruiting others, spreading the Gentic taint among people they trust. We should clarify here. The term Genestealer Cult is what the Imperium calls these infestations. The cultists themselves have no idea that they are pawns of a Tyranid hive mind, at least not initially and not in those terms. To them, it feels like a religious awakening or a liberation movement. The original Genestealer, once it has infected enough hosts, becomes the patriarch of the cult, effectively the cult's chief deity figure or patriarchal leader. Physically, a patriarch is just the first Genestealer grown large and bloated on the psychic power drawn from its expanding brood. It often literally grows in size and intelligence as its family expands, eventually becoming a monstrous, engorged version of a Genestealer sitting at the heart of the cult's lair. From that first handful of infected followers, the cult begins to multiply. There's a very literal biological component. Infected humans, under the influence of the Genestealer's genetic alterations, will produce hybrid offspring. If two infected humans, or otherwise tainted individuals, have a child, that child might be a Genestealer hybrid, part human, part Genestealer. In the first Gen ration of such hybrids, the alien traits are usually very pronounced: extra limbs, claws, an elongated skull, etc. These are horrifying creatures to behold, clearly not human, and they typically must be hidden away from society. But to the cult, they are precious children, the next sacred Gen ration of the family. The cult members will hide these neonates in secret hovels, cult hideouts, or deep underground, raising them in the faith of the Star Children, a term many cults use for the Tyranid beings, as we'll detail later. Successive Gen rations of hybrid offspring become progressively more human-looking. This is a quirk of the Genestealer life cycle. By the third and fourth Gen rations, many hybrids can pass as normal humans in public. By the fourth Gen ration, you often get an individual who is nearly indistinguishable from an ordinary human, except for perhaps a faint bluish skin tone or a subtle psychic presence. These later Gen ration hybrids are incredibly useful to the cult because they can infiltrate human society undetected. They might get jobs, join local organizations, even infiltrate the planetary defense forces or law enforcement. All the while, they remain utterly loyal to the cult's goals, working as secret agents to expand its influence. To give an idea of the timeline, a Genestealer infestation can, in just a few standard years, expand from one creature to a network of hundreds of infected and hybrid individuals. Within a few decades, if unchecked, it can number in the thousands or millions, reaching into every stratum of society. Each infected person can continue living an outwardly normal life, all while quietly subverting others. There are even cases where high-ranking officials, administrators, military officers, planetary nobles were infected or converted, and they used their power to shield the cult. By the time any suspicious authorities start to notice odd occurrences, the cult might already have its claws deep in the planet's command structure. One infamous historical example: on the mining world, Gosar Quintus, the ruling aristocratic house, the Trist dynasty, was infiltrated by a Genestealer patriarch sometime around the early 41st millennium. For years, perhaps decades, this alien corruption festered. The noble family and many of their minors fell under the sway of the cult, all while maintaining a facade of loyalty to the Imperium. When an Imperial Inquisitor finally came investigating rumors of heresy, even he was deceived and suborned by the cult's influence. In fact, his final report back declared everything fine. An ominous sign later discovered to be a result of his own infection. It took the intervention of an elite Death Watch Space Marine team led by Chaplain Cassius to finally uncover and purge that nest. And by then, the cult had spread beyond just that one planet through trade shipments. This illustrates how a cult can hide in plain sight, weaving itself into the fabric of a society with terrifying patience. Key point. At its core, the Genestealer cult spreads like a cancer through both biological reproduction and ideological conversion. Its members might kidnap isolated individuals and infect them directly, creating new loyal hybrids in the next gene ration. Or they might recruit disaffected, non-infected people to support the cult's cause through rhetoric and promises. Often it's a combination of both. While true unwavering loyalty usually comes from the actual Genestealer bioinfection, the cult can have a penumbra of sympathizers who are drawn in by its message. We'll explore that message soon. These sympathizers might not yet be implanted with the Jinn seed, but they may assist the cult out of belief or desperation, and likely get fully blessed, infected eventually. The early stages of a cult are all about infiltration and survival. The cult must avoid detection by the planetary authorities while expanding its numbers. The infected members typically meet in secret, perhaps in abandoned tunnels, mining shafts, old warehouses, or hidden areas beneath cities. They form a clandestine community right under the noses of the wider population. A passerby on the street would never know that the hunched sanitation worker pushing a cart or the quiet clerk in the administration office are members of a Xenos-worshipping cabal plotting the downfall of the entire society. For a long time, the cult's activities might be very low-key. They often preach caution and secrecy internally. There is a concept of the long wait, or the day to come, that cultists hold on to. They believe, correctly, that one day their gods, the Tyranid fleets, will arrive, and that day will be their ultimate reward, or Ascension, as many cults call it. Until then, they must prepare. This means stockpiling weapons, infiltrating key positions, undermining the existing order subtly, and making converts of the downtrodden. They essentially lie in wait, acting like normal citizens by day and conspirators by night. It's no exaggeration to say that a fully mature Genestealer cult can grow to encompass a huge portion of a planet's population. If conditions are right, entire cities can quietly fall under the cult's sway before a shot is even fired. Hive world populations, numbering in the billions, offer especially fertile ground, vast slums and underhives where people disappear or form cultish sects all the time, usually without attracting much notice from on high. In such places, a Genestealer infection can spread through the marginalized masses, almost like a virus of belief, hidden among ordinary riots, gang activity, or political dissent. By the time the planetary governor, or Adeptus Arbites, imperial law enforcement, realize that something more sinister than a mundane rebellion is going on, the rot is already deep. So, from one stowaway alien to a sprawling secret society, that is the Genestealer of a Genestealer cult. Now, how do these cultists actually perceive their situation? To call it brainwashing is true, but it's also an oversimplification. They have, in effect, formed a new religion and culture centered on the Tyranids. In the next section, we'll look at the belief system and ethos of these cults, because, yes, even though it's orchestrated by an alien hive mind, from the inside it genuinely functions as a cult with fervent worship and doctrine. Cult society and hierarchy, family of the four-armed emperor. Operating in the shadows of society, a Genestealer cult develops its own intricate hierarchy and culture. What might seem to outsiders as a ragtag group of mutants is actually highly organized, often mirroring or parodying the structures of the very Imperium it plots to overthrow. Let's break down the typical organization chart of a Genestealer cult and how daily life might look for its members. At the very top sits the Patriarch, which we've mentioned. This is the original Genestealer that started it all, or the oldest pure strain in the cult. The Patriarch is not just a figurehead, it is the psychic nexus of the brood. It typically lurks in the deepest sanctum of the cult's lair, growing ever more physically imposing and psychically potent as the cult expands. The Patriarch is revered almost as a living god, incarnate by the cultists. Many cults give it lofty titles. For example, a common one is the Four-Armed Emperor. From a cultist's perspective, the Patriarch is a divine patriarchal figure blessed with 4 arms. 2 more than the God Emperor of mankind, an intentional blasphemy they embrace. To them, this signifies the Patriarch's superiority and holiness. Calling their leader the Four-Armed Emperor also has a practical benefit. If a cultist is overheard talking about worship and emperors, imperial authorities might assume they're just overly pious imperial citizens, since the Imperium's own state religion is the cult of the Emperor. Little would they guess that Emperor in this context refers to a clawed alien monstrosity hiding underground. Directly under the Patriarch, most cults have a priestly and command class. Foremost among these is the Magus. A Magus is usually a 4th Gen ration hybrid who appears completely human and possesses strong psychic abilities inherited from the Genestealer lineage. If the Patriarch is the cult's god king, the Magus is its high priest and prophet. The Magus often serves as the cult's public face or voice when subtle influence is needed. Charismatic and clever, a Magus might move in human society as a demagogue or guru figure, converting the disillusioned to the cult's cause with stirring words. Internally, the Magus interprets the Patriarch's will, since the Patriarch itself may be more bestial or silent except through telepathy, and issues commands to the flock. The Magus can also telepathically link with cult members, strengthening their devotion and shielding their minds from probing by Imperial psychers. Essentially, the Magus orchestrates the cult's strategies and religious fervor in equal measure. Then there is the Primus, the military commander of the cult. Where the Magus handles the spiritual and covert aspects, the Primus is all about combat and tactical leadership. A Primus is often another late Gen ration hybrid, gifted with an exceptionally keen strategic mind, again courtesy of the Tyranid Gen-S, and a talent for assassination and guerrilla warfare. This figure often spends years embedded in the planet's military or mercenary groups, learning the arts of war and the enemy's weaknesses. When the time comes for open revolt, the Primus leads the cult's forces in battle, coordinating ambushes and strikes with a preternatural cunning. One could think of the Primus as the cult's general, training the cultists in secret drills and drawing up plans for the eventual uprising. Together, the Patriarch, Magus, and Primus form an inner circle, sometimes called the Brood Coven. They are the guiding triumvirate, or perhaps trinity, in the cult's twisted religion that ensures the cult's survival and ultimate success. If 1 or 2 of them fall, the cult can often adapt. For example, if the Patriarch is somehow killed, the Magus might take over leadership until a new pure strain Genestealer can ascend to become the next patriarch. They are nothing if not resilient and fanatically driven. Beneath those leaders, there are numerous specialized roles and sub-factions within the cult, each contributing to its clandestine operations. Acolytes and neophyte. These terms often refer to the hybrid members of the cult by gene ration. Acolyte hybrids are usually earlier gene ration, more visibly alien ones who tend to stay hidden until battle. They might have 3 arms, odd skin, etc., making them hard to pass as human. They serve as the cult's shock troops and manual labor force in the shadows. For example, doing the heavy lifting in building secret bunkers or mining new tunnel networks for the cult's use. Neophyte hybrids, on the other hand, are later gene ration ones who look human enough to move freely in society. Neophytes might infiltrate local PDF, Planetary Defense Force regiments, work in manufactorum factories, or even serve as clerks in government offices, all while secretly furthering cult goals. By day, they wear the uniform of the Imperium. By night, they don the tattered robes and cult insignias of the Star Children's Faithful. Brood Brothers. This term usually denotes pure-blooded humans who are either infected, often those first gene ration victims who weren't physically mutated but carry the Genestealer gene tick influence, or even uninfected humans who have been indoctrinated. In many cults, especially in their own propaganda, these human members are considered part of the family and brothers in the brood. Some brood brothers might be normal soldiers or citizens who've been swayed to the cause and await their chance to prove loyalty, often by receiving the so-called blessing of the Jinn, kiss later. Notably, whole units of Imperial Guard or Planetary Defense Forces have been revealed as brood brothers, fighting alongside hybrid kin when the uprising starts. They are valued because they often can operate heavy weapons or vehicles that the cult has suborned, and they usually have legitimate access to armories. Cult icons and preachers. Many cults have members tasked with maintaining morale and spreading the creed subtly. For instance, the Acolyte Icon Ward is a role mentioned in cult traditions, basically a banner bearer who carries the cult's sacred icon, often an image of a 3- or 4-armed divine figure or a stylized Tyranid organism. In battle, this inspires the cult troops, but even before open war, these individuals might be in charge of secret ceremonies and relics. Then there are propaganda specialists like the Clamavus, essentially a communications expert. A Clamavus carries illicit Vox equipment and devices that can hijack communication networks. In the moments of uprising, a Clamavus will jam enemy transmissions and broadcast the cult's own messages, like revolutionary slogans or rallying prayers, across the airwaves. It's said some Clamavus implants even allow them to emit an otherworldly call that invigorates cultists and sows fear in enemies, as if the voices of the Star Children themselves were echoing through them. Assassins and saboteurs. To maintain secrecy and eliminate threats, cults employ their own killers. The Sanctus is an archetype of a cult assassin, a particularly sinister hybrid bred or trained to excel at silent killing, often equipped with sniper rifles, poisoned blades, or even psychotropic venom to quietly take out key targets. If a planetary governor or inquisitive priest starts asking the wrong questions, a Sanctus might be dispatched to ensure those questions stop. Additionally, the cult breeds brutish enforcers like aberrants. These are usually genetic throwbacks, hulking mutants with excessive muscle mass, often wielding repurposed industrial tools as weapons. Imagine a deformed giant swinging a mining hammer or rock drill. Aberrants serve as heavy shock troops and bodyguards for the cult's leaders when needed. They may not be bright, but they are devastating in close quarters and nearly fearless due to their conditioning. Jinn, seers, and bioalchemists. Some cult members take on roles akin to mad scientists or medics, such as the biophagus. A biophagus is a corrupted alchemist or Jinn-tor who conducts experiments to refine the cult's Jinn-tick stock or brew toxins and stimulants. They might augment aberrants with chemical concoctions or ensure that any newly infected hosts survive the transformation. In essence, they apply grim science to further the cult's evolutionary advantage. This again is an eerie mirror of the Imperium's own Adeptus Mechanicus, or biomagi, but twisted towards Xenos ends. As you can see, the cult becomes an entire sub-society with various professions dedicated to its survival and success. Priests, warriors, spies, tech specialists, and more. They refer to each other as kin, brothers, sisters, fathers, using familial language to reinforce unity. In fact, that's one of the cult's strengths. There is a genuine sense of belonging and shared purpose among them, perverse as it is. Many cult members were those who felt abandoned or downtrodden in Imperial society. The cult gives them a family, albeit a corrupted one, that cares for them in its own way. Daily life inside a cult. By day, most cultists will blend into their normal roles. A miner goes to the mines and digs as usual, perhaps all the while humming a secret hymn to the coming dawn under his breath. A clerk stamps paperwork in the administratum office while quietly siphoning useful data to the cult. Families in on the secret might host discreet gatherings in their basements where hybrid children play, learning cant phrases, praising the patriarch, but careful not to speak of such things at school. There might be graffiti scrawled in under-hive corridors, symbols like a crude four-armed silhouette or a spiral worm that only cult initiates recognize as messages or rally points. At night or in hidden moments, the cult communes. Imagine a hidden chapel deep in the sump of a hive city, candles made from rendered tallow. Maybe not strictly human tallow, though in 40K, who knows? A tattered banner showing a starburst symbol or a fanged maw, and dozens of robed figures gathered in silence. The air is thick with incense, perhaps fungal incense from the bowels of the hive. A magus stands before them, arms outstretched, preaching in a sonorous tone. "Rejoice, my siblings, for the day of Ascension draws near. The star children watch over us even now from beyond the void. We are the faithful among billions, chosen to be saved from this cruel world and delivered into the light of a new dawn." The congregation sways, some weep with joy, others speak in glossolalia, strange tongues, as they feel the psychic presence of the patriarch nearby. In a dark alcove, partially concealed, the patriarch itself might be gazing out, its alien visage somehow soft in the eyes of its devotees, who see not a monster but an angelic father figure radiating benevolence. It's a chilling tableau, pure horror to an outside observer, but a scene of solace and hope for those within. This is how a cult maintains loyalty and fervor. They sincerely believe they are working toward a utopian goal, the overthrow of their oppressors and a union with something greater. The details vary from cult to cult. Many speak of the Star Children, essentially their name for the Tyranids or the hive mind, mythologized as celestial saviors. Some call them the Sky Gods, or as mentioned, the four-armed Emperor's angels. To them, the Patriarch and perhaps the highest pure strain hybrids are the prophets or children of these star gods. They actively invert imperial creed, where an imperial citizen might pray, "The Emperor protects," a cultist might whisper, "The four-armed Emperor provides." They've even co-opted the imperial aquila, double-headed eagle symbol on occasion. There are reports of graffiti that altered the eagle to have four wings or arms, hinting at the cult presence through such twisted iconography. One could say the Genestealer Cults practice a form of apocalyptic millenarian religion. They predict a transformative event, the arrival of the Hive Fleet, which will utterly change the world and exalt the faithful. All their hymns, slogans, and teachings point toward this coming day. It's very analogous to certain doomsday cults in our own history, except in this case the doomsday is real and physically coming from outer space. They call this event by many names: the Day of Ascension, the Great Rising, the Coming of the Star Children, etc. We'll explore the event itself in a later section, but imagine living your whole life in anticipation of a promised deliverance, one that requires you to endure hardship and secrecy now in exchange for paradise later. That's the mentality cult leaders instill. What about those who hesitate or don't fully buy in? The cult does not tolerate betrayal for long. If a member starts getting cold feet or speaks of leaving, a few outcomes are possible. Often, peer pressure and the psychic bond keep them in line, but if someone outright tries to defect or warn the authorities, the cult will swiftly silence them, perhaps sending a Sanctus assassin to make it look like a random murder or under-hive mugging. In a tragic twist, there have been accounts of cultists who momentarily break free of the mental conditioning. Say, someone sees the Patriarch's true monstrous form and has a flash of clarity. In those moments, some have been horrified at what they've helped create, but those moments rarely last, either because the brood mind reasserts control or because the person is eliminated or re-indoctrinated by their brethren. The level of control is such that true dissent within a mature cult is quite rare. They are, by design, of one mind, literally a hive mind extension. Now, considering how all this looks to an outside observer, for a long time the Imperium had trouble identifying these cults. Many Imperial authorities might misinterpret early cult activity as something more mundane, like a chaos cult or a rebellion over labor conditions. Indeed, cultists often exploit labor disputes or social unrest to hide their own agenda. They might even lead worker strikes or populist movements, calling the common folk to rise against their cruel overseers, the planetary governor, the noble elite, etc. These slogans resonate with people because, let's face it, life under the Imperium is often cruel and oppressive. On many worlds, the majority live in squalor and toil while a few enjoy privilege. A Genestealer cult cunningly taps into this resentment. They portray the cult as a righteous resistance movement or a salvation sect. They tell people, "We have been slaves to heartless masters, but the Star Children have heard our cries. They will free us from the tyranny of the Imperium's corrupt nobility and false emperor." Such rhetoric can attract those at the bottom rungs of society, even without the Jinn curse compelling them. Perhaps someone's family was left to die by a neglectful governor or a mutant outcast who is persecuted daily. The cult offers them community and hope. It's a darkly ironic dynamic. The Imperium's own brutality creates the perfect soil for the Tyranid subversion to grow. One could say, with a bit of sarcasm, that the Imperium is often its own worst enemy. Treat your people like expendable cogs for too long, and they might just turn to the first glimmer of hope that comes along, even if that hope is a beautiful lie. And a Genestealer cult's promise is a lie, but a seductive one. A new world without pain, where you will be reunited with lost loved ones and no longer hunger or suffer. They don't mention the part about being dissolved into biomass. Naturally, that part of the scripture is metaphorical at best from the cult's perspective. To summarize this section, a Genestealer cult in full bloom is a well-oiled clandestine society with leaders, Patriarch, Magus, Primus, a devoted populace of hybrids and converts, acolytes, neophytes, brood brothers, and various specialist agents. It has its own rituals, icons, and doctrines that simultaneously hide behind and subvert imperial norms. Day by day, it chips away at the foundations of its host society, quietly replacing pieces with its own loyal components. Eventually, there comes a tipping point when the cult moves from passive growth to active revolution, and that is the moment everything changes, both for the cultists and the world they inhabit. Let's move on to that explosive climax in the cult life cycle, the so-called Day of Ascension. Creed of the Star Children, faith in the alien. Before we dive into the actual uprising, it's worth exploring a bit more deeply what these cultists actually believe on a spiritual level. Understanding their faith will shed light on why they act with such fanatical devotion during the endgame. As we've touched on, Genestealer cults basically form a new religion centered on the Tyranid entities. Since this religion is engineered through psychic compulsion, one might think it's purely synthetic, just hardwired programming from the alien. However, to the human or otherwise minds experiencing it, it feels genuinely spiritual and transcendent. They develop scriptures, prophecies, and rituals to articulate their experiences. It's a fascinating and morbid example of how the human urge to find meaning can be co-opted by an external force. The core tenets across most cults could be summarized as follows. The Star Children, or Sky Gods, are divine beings from beyond the stars who have chosen us, the downtrodden, for salvation. This is how cultists interpret the Tyranids. They often don't know the specifics, like they won't lecture about how Hive Fleet Leviathan has this many bioships, etc. They see them in mythic terms. In their lore, the Star Children might be depicted as luminous celestial entities or angels. The physical Genestealers and Tyranid creatures present on the planet are seen as heralds or holy messengers. For example, a pure-strain Genestealer that a cult encounters isn't viewed as a mere animal. It could be called the Blessed Father, or voice of the God's will, etc. The Patriarch, being a Genestealer evolved by many psychic linkages, is often considered the nearest thing to the Star Children's essence made flesh. The four-armed Emperor, Patriarch, is a holy figure, a true savior in a way the false emperor of mankind is not. Cultists often mock or repudiate the Imperium's emperor, though carefully in code, to avoid tipping off outsiders. They claim the emperor of man has failed his people. Look at the suffering everywhere. Instead, this new emperor with four arms will lead them to a true golden age. Some cult scriptures paint the four-armed emperor as a benevolent patriarch who will embrace his children with four arms, holding all of us close. If you strip away the fact we're talking about a monster, there's an almost comforting image there, a father figure who literally has extra arms to hug all his family at once. That psychological appeal shouldn't be underestimated. It turns out, being literally embraced by a giant-clawed alien can be sold as a positive thing in the right or wrong context. The Day of Ascension is coming. This is their equivalent of Judgment Day or Rapture. On that day, the Star Children will arrive to carry the faithful into the heavens and remake the world. Now, from outside, we know this means the Tyranid Hive Fleet shows up to devour everything, but cult doctrine describes it in euphemistic, glorious terms. There are verses about how the sky will open and the children of the stars will descend in glory, or how the faithful shall ascend, cast off their frail flesh and become one with the divine infinite. If you read between the lines, cast off their frail flesh indeed sounds like being melted down in a digestion pool and become one with the infinite is basically joining the hive mind's collective. But to a believer, these words aren't taken as death. they imply transformation or apotheosis. It's similar to how some real-world cults view an apocalyptic event not as annihilation but as transformation or transport to a higher plane. The Genestealer cultists are essentially marching themselves into oblivion with a smile, believing it's the doorway to paradise. Anything outside the cult is impure or oppressive, and opposing it is holy work. This justifies all their lies, theft, and murders as they undermine the Imperium or any non-cult authority. They view Imperial officials as either tools of an uncaring regime or outright heretics standing in the way of the Star Children's plan. Many cults have a martyrdom mentality, a willingness to die for the cause because they think even death furthers the cult's goal, and they'll be rewarded after Ascension anyway. A common sentiment might be, better to die in service of the true gods than live one more day as a slave to false lords. This means that cultists can be frighteningly fearless and cannot be easily reasoned with by outside logic. Try telling a cultist, the things you worship will eat you, and they either won't believe you or they'll respond with, yes, and in being eaten I shall be made pure. It's basically impossible to talk someone out of that mindset once it's ingrained. Symbols and sacraments. The cults have their own symbols that mark their faith. The most iconic is the depiction of a stylized Genestealer crossbreed, often a haloed figure with 4 arms, sometimes holding various objects like a sword, a staff, a book, etc., representing conquest, faith, knowledge. Twisted parallels to Imperial iconography. Many cult members secretly carry pendants or tattoos of a worm or 3-clawed mark. Blood rituals are not uncommon. Some cults engage in ceremonial bloodletting or sharing of the blood of the patriarch, which might literally be some concoction with jinn tick material. They might commemorate the date a new jinn ration is born, or a successful infiltration with reverence, like Saints' Days. One particularly unnerving practice in some cult narratives is cannibalistic communion. Cult members ritually consume organic matter from a deceased pure strain, or mayus, to strengthen their bond. This mimics how Tyranids themselves absorb biomass to share memories. In a cult ceremony, they might think of it as sharing the flesh to join the soul. This is not universal to all cults in lore, but it exemplifies how far the religious aspect can go. Another concept is Kiss of the Star Children, referring to the initial Genestealer infection. Cult members, ironically, speak of being kissed by the divine. To those in the know, if someone says they were blessed by the kiss, that means they've been genomorphically infected and are now part of the brood. There's a creepy reverence in how they talk about what is essentially a parasitic assault. They frame it as a loving act, almost akin to baptism or confirmation in their faith. While we, the observers, understand this is all induced by the Genestealer's influence, the cultists overlay a cultural narrative on it. This is what makes Genestealer cults so fascinating in Warhammer lore. They aren't just mindless zombie slaves. They develop a culture around their servitude that can even attract new recruits on its own merits. There are instances recorded where individuals joined a cult through persuasion before being physically infected, drawn by the message. These people invariably get the full infection treatment eventually, but the fact they came willingly speaks volumes. On worlds where Imperial Creed is failing the populace, the cult's promise might sound more genuine or achievable than distant Terra's promises. To highlight one dramatic example from lore, on the world of Vigilus, which became a major war zone in recent history, there was a Genestealer cult known as the Pauper Princes. They spread among the Hive City refugees and underclass for 2 centuries by preaching equality and hope. The Pauper Princes cultists were highly religious and zealous. They They convinced even some of the planet's nobility to secretly fund or protect them by framing the cult as a liberation theology. By the time Vigilus's authorities realized, the pauper princes had agents everywhere. They even seized control of vital resources like the water supply, contaminating it, both to weaken the population and to spread their jinn spore further. Their faith in the Star Children's deliverance kept them organized even in the face of brutal crackdown. It took intervention by multiple Space Marine chapters to drive the cult into hiding during the war. And even then, when Chaos invaders later hit the planet, the cult resurfaced to take advantage of the chaos, pun intended, and ended up controlling large swaths of the world. In fact, by the end of the Vigilus conflicts, it's noted that huge portions of the planet were effectively overrun by Genestealer cultists, some reports saying the Imperium lost control of significant zones to them amidst the anarchy. Even in a war zone full of orcs and Chaos Marines, these cultists were a significant threat. That's how fervent and coordinated they were through their belief. All right, by now we have a thorough picture of how the cult operates in secret and what it believes. The tension has been building, all this preparation for the glorious future. Now the climax approaches. What does this famed day of Ascension actually look like from the perspective of the cultists and the poor souls around them? Buckle up, because it's about to get very bloody. The Day of Ascension, Uprising and Deliverance. Every Genestealer cult works toward a singular moment of eruption, the point at which they shed their disguises and openly rebel against the existing order. This is both a practical military insurrection and a rapturous religious event for them, the culmination of years, or Jinn rations of faith. It's commonly called the Day of Ascension. The choice of the word ascension is no accident. It implies that the cultists believe they are rising to a higher state of being. In truth, it's often the day many of them will die, but they see death in service as simply the next step toward unity with their gods. How is the day chosen? In some cases, it coincides with signs that a Tyranid Hive Fleet is approaching the system. The Patriarch, via its psychic link, can often sense when the hive mind draws near. Remember, as the cult grows, the Patriarch's psychic presence becomes a beacon that actually attracts the Hive Fleet across the warp, like a psychic lighthouse saying, "Plenty of food here, come on me over." So as Tyranids get within a certain range, the connection intensifies. The cult's leadership will take this as the omen. The stars are right. The prophecy is about to be fulfilled. In cult propaganda, they might say, "The Star Children hear our prayers. Their angels are on the wing." The Magus or Patriarch will send out the mental command that resonates in every brood-linked mind. "Rise up, now is the hour." In other cases, the timing might be triggered by necessity, if the cult is in danger of being uncovered prematurely, or if a rival threat, like a chaos incursion or an orc invasion, threatens to destroy the planet first, the cult might accelerate their plans. They won't want their planet to be obliterated or claimed by someone else before the Hive Fleet can harvest it. In these instances, it's more like a desperate scramble to still achieve their purpose, even if the timing isn't ideal. But under optimal conditions, the cult bides its time until the perfect moment of maximum impact. Now, picture the Day of Ascension on a given world. It often begins with coordinated surprise attacks and acts of sabotage. In the hours, or even minutes, leading up to the open revolt, cult agents make their moves. Communications cut off. Cultists embedded in Vox relay stations disable planetary communications, ensuring that cities can't call each other for help, and the planet can't easily send a distress signal to nearby Imperial forces. If they have a clamavus, perhaps instead of the usual morning broadcast from the Administorum, suddenly the speakers blare out a distorted message of, "Brothers and sisters, cast off your chains. followed by ominous chants in a tongue nobody recognizes, the language of the cult. Confusion reigns among loyalist populations as the information network goes dark or subverts. Key strategic points are seized swiftly. Spaceports, defense laser silos, orbital defense batteries, power plants, and armories all are prime targets. The cult, thanks to its planning, knows exactly where these are and likely has insiders ready to open the gates from within. For example, at the main spaceport, half the security detail might secretly be Brood Brothers. At the signal, they turn their guns on the loyal half. A firefight breaks out. Simultaneously, neophyte hybrids working in the control tower sabotage the guidance systems and lower the void shields protecting the facility. In short order, the spaceport falls under cult control, or at least is neutralized. This is crucial because it prevents the authorities from launching escape shuttles or fighters, and it prevents reinforcement landings by Imperial allies, should they arrive quickly. Similarly, planetary defense lasers that could shoot down incoming bioships are disabled or pointed away uselessly. The cult essentially tries to decapitate the planet's defenses in the opening salvo. Meanwhile, in the city streets and manufactorum districts, open rebellion sparks. At prearranged signals, could be specific times, could be an auditory cue from cultists howling, or perhaps a subtle psychic push from the Patriarch. Cult members everywhere reveal themselves. Workers rise against overseers. Factory sirens are hijacked to blare revolutionary songs. Gangs of hybrids emerge from the underhive, wielding mining equipment turned into weapons. Rock drills, blasting charges, heavy industrial saws. Storehouses of stockpiled guns, robbed from the Imperial Guard depots over years, are thrown open and distributed to cult fighters. Often the uprising has a sense of festival for the cultists, a violent celebration. They come bearing their cult banners at last, openly. These banners might show that worm symbol or the four-armed silhouette, and they've been lovingly hand-sewn or painted in secret for this day. Imagine oppressed workers who've had to hide their true allegiance, finally ripping off their false imperial eagles and raising the cult icon high, chanting praises to the Patriarch as they swarm en masse. The combat itself is brutal and chaotic. It's not a clean military engagement, it's house-to-house urban warfare and mass riots blended together. The cult has the advantage of surprise and internal position. But the loyalist forces, Imperial Guard regiments stationed there, enforcers, arbites, local militia, or PDF units not turned, will of course fight back desperately once they recover from the shock. What's tragic is that often the loyalists are disorganized at first. Their chain of command is disrupted. Some officers were cultists and have assassinated their superiors. Their communications are down, and they're hesitant because they're often shooting at people who were neighbors and comrades minutes ago. It's warfare at its ugliest, infiltration turning into fratricidal slaughter. One minute, a PDF sergeant is drilling his squad. The next minute, half his squad starts shooting the other half from behind. You can imagine the confusion and horror. The cult's aim in this rebellion is twofold: overthrow the existing authority to prepare for the Hive Fleet's arrival, and draw as many defenders into conflict as possible, weakening them. They don't actually need to conquer the planet in a traditional sense or preserve infrastructure. Remember, the end goal is the Tyranids coming to consume everything. So cultists have zero qualms about using tactics that cause maximum mayhem, even if it means heavy losses for themselves or destruction of assets. In fact, sowing maximum terror and division can be advantageous. A planet embroiled in civil war is an easy feast for the Tyranids, so cultists might deliberately do things like open all the prisons, causing a wave of chaos, set hab blocks on fire, sabotage food production, etc. From the cult's perspective, any weakening of the planet's integrity is good. They're essentially anti-terraforming, prepping the world by turning it into a mess. However, they don't see it as nihilistic destruction. The cult narrative is that this is the purge of the old corrupt order. They see themselves as revolutionaries who will usher in a paradise, albeit letting their gods do the heavy lifting of regime change by devouring everyone. Some cult literature even has them singing hymns or reciting litanies as they charge into battle. Picture hybrid insurgents roaring for the four-armed emperor as they clash with stunned imperial troopers. It's both absurd and terrifying, the devout zeal in those inhuman faces. They genuinely have battle cries praising the things that most humans consider nightmares. Inevitably, the day of Ascension is incredibly bloody. We should not pretend that cultists win every fight. Often they incur massive casualties. Many are just farmers or workers with small arms going up against trained soldiers. But their advantages are surprise, numbers, if they've recruited a huge underclass, and the fact that they often control the narrative initially, jamming comms, etc. Plus, remember, a lot of the planet's military power could already be compromised. If, say, 30% of the PDF was secretly cult and another 20% are unsure or sympathizers, that leaves only half trying to rally against them and probably in disarray. A common outcome as the dust settles is that the entire planet is plunged into anarchy. The cult might capture some cities fully, while loyalist forces hold others, resulting in a fragmented, war-torn world. In some scenarios, the cult actually succeeds in toppling the planetary government completely, executing the governor and raising their flags over the capital spire. In other cases, the uprising might stall or be partially contained, but even a contained cult uprising can essentially ruin a planet's defensive readiness. From an Imperium perspective, if they somehow get astropathic word that Genestealer uprising in progress, their reaction is extremely severe. Genestealer cults are considered such a dire internal threat that standard procedure, if containment seems unlikely, is to order exterminatus, the complete sterilization of the planet, via cyclonic torpedo bombardment or virus bombing. Yes, the Imperium would rather wipe out an entire planet, killing both cultists and any remaining loyal populace, than let a Genestealer-infected world remain, because they know if a Hive Fleet comes, not only is that world lost, but potentially the Hive Fleet grows stronger by feeding on it, then moves to the next. It's a terribly cruel calculus, but that's the grim logic of 40K. There have been historical instances where, once the Genestealer nature of a rebellion was confirmed, Inquisitors didn't even try to save the place. They signed off its death warrant to contain the spread. After all, if a single Genestealer escaping can start the cycle elsewhere, the only sure solution is absolute purging. However, exterminatus is not always possible or timely. Maybe communications are down, or the needed ships aren't nearby, or politically it's hard to get permission in time. Often the cult uprising runs its course and then the sky grows dark. Not from ash or smoke, though there's plenty of that too, but from the arrival of the gods. Which brings us to the fateful culmination, the moment the Tyranid Hive Fleet arrives above a cult-infected world. From orbit, Tyranid bioships descend like a living armada, grotesque organic vessels that blot out the sun. Spore pods rain down through the atmosphere, and the true harvesting begins. Let's shift perspective now. How do the cultists react when their prayers are finally answered and they see the titans of their faith for the first time? When the gods arrive, devoured by divinity. As the Tyranid Hive Fleet's organisms enter the atmosphere, the cultists on the ground are elated. the very sight that makes loyal Imperial citizens scream in terror, for they know a Hive Fleet means near certain doom, instead makes the cultists fall to their knees in praise. To the cult, this is the confirmation of everything they believed. The Star Children have come as promised. The skies might literally rain acidic Tyranid spores, and capillary towers might punch up from the ground as the Tyranids begin to reshape the biosphere. But the cultists interpret even these horrific phenomena as holy signs. They breathe in toxic hive spores like it's blessed incense. Typically, when Tyranids invade a planet, any pockets of resistance, even if they were fighting each other moments before, will usually try to unite against the common foe, because nothing unites like a bigger threat overhead. But a Genestealer cult does the opposite. They actively assist the Tyranids, or at least don't resist them. In fact, cultists often launch suicidal final assaults on remaining human strongholds at this stage, effectively coordinating with the Hive Fleet's assault to wipe out organized opposition. It's like an internal betrayal at the crucial moment of planetary defense. Just when the Imperium forces want to rally against the extraterrestrial invader, a million cult knives stab them in the back from within the walls. It's disastrous militarily, which is exactly what the hive mind intended by seeding the cult in the first place. One could imagine a last stand scene, perhaps a regiment of Imperial Guard and a handful of Adeptus Arbites judges have barricaded themselves in a fortress, determined to sell their lives dearly to the oncoming aliens. But to their despair, they find cultists already opening the gates from inside or sabotaging the ammo store. As Hormagaunts, chittering Tyranid creatures, swarm in, those defenders who were secretly cultists might even shoot their fellow humans in the back, then kneel and let the Tyranid creatures run past them to slaughter the rest. The cultists might chant and raise their arms in a gesture of welcome as these nightmares flood the citadel. It's a total collapse of resistance. Now, individually, how does it end for cult members? The hive mind doesn't exactly descend and say, "Good job, here's your reward." The reward is basically to be consumed. Tyranids devour every shred of biomass, and cultists are made of biomass like anyone else. In many cases, cultists will actively allow themselves to be killed. There are accounts in Imperial records of cultists ecstatically throwing themselves into digestion pools, literally walking into the giant biovats of Tyranid goo that dissolve organic matter. They sing hymns or weep tears of joy as they melt. That's about as grimdark as it gets. Joyous mass suicide via alien digestion. Others stand in worshipful poses as Ripper swarms, little Tyranid-eating creatures, tear them apart. They might shout praises like, "We are yours," with their last breath, genuinely believing they are ascending to join the Star Children's eternal chorus or whatever equivalent paradise they've imagined. In some particularly chilling scenes, cultist parents have been noted to push their children forward into the oncoming Tyranid swarms, as if offering them to angels, believing their family will be made whole in the belly of the beast, quite literally. It is almost merciful that the Tyranids often override the cult's illusions quickly. As the hive mind's shadow falls on the world, that brood telepathy that guided the cult might get subsumed by the larger hive mind. Many cultists may effectively lose that comforting psychic signal and just become more or less ordinary humans at the instant of their demise, with maybe still unwavering loyalty, but not necessarily constant euphoria. It's not entirely clear in lore whether they remain euphoric or some snap out of it at the final moment. Probably varies. Some remain exultant, others might suddenly realize, oh, if the brood mind link flickers. There are recorded instances where, at the very end, some cult members did become horrifyingly aware of the mistake they've made. The Lexiconum notes cases where certain cultists, as they're being swallowed or as the hive mind absorbs the patriarch, realize the truth that they are not going to be granted a utopia. They're being used as fodder. A few such individuals might feel betrayal, even fear, in their last moments. Some might even try to run or fight back against the Tyranids in a futile, panicked way. Imagine the psychological torment. Your faith carried you so far, only to have the veil lifted right as jaws close around you. There was a mention that some cults or individuals have even rebelled against the Tyranids at the very end, out of sheer despair or anger that their gods were false. These are certainly rare exceptions. The vast majority either remain faithful to death or simply are too caught up in events to do anything but die. It's also worth mentioning, the Patriarch itself, the big boss Genestealer, doesn't get a happy ending either. Once the Hive Fleet is there, the Patriarch's role is done. The powerful will of the Hive Mind, which is a trillion-fold collective intelligence of the Tyranids, overpowers the Patriarch's localized brood mind. The Patriarch and its pure, strain children essentially revert to being just extensions of the Hive Fleet's will. There are accounts that sometimes the Patriarch and pure strains will even turn on the cultists at the end, massacring their own former flock, because the hive mind wants absolutely no pockets of resistance or independent thought. Even the slight individuality a cultist has is not desired in the final assimilation. The cult's purpose was to weaken the planet. Once that's achieved, they're as redundant as any other animal on the world. They all become biomass to be harvested. In effect, the cult is a means to an end, and the Tyranids do not show gratitude. They are simply forces of nature, or of the hive's nature. In one grim anecdote, after a battle where a cult had assisted a hive fleet in conquering a world, Imperial reports described seeing cultists with expressions of bliss on their faces, serenely allowing Tyranid feeder organisms to envelop them. But among these, a magus was recorded as crying tears, not of joy but of heartbreak as he too was consumed, possibly indicating he realized, at that final second, that the divinity he served would give him no special exemption or reward. Whether this was an accurate observation or the Imperial writer's poetic interpretation, it paints the picture that even the highest cult leaders who sacrificed everything simply vanish into the swarm like all other mortals. From the Imperium's strategic perspective, a planet that reaches this stage is lost. If by some miracle an Imperial relief force arrives during the feeding, they might attempt the most drastic measure, an exterminatus to deny the Tyranids their meal, essentially poisoning the feast. That's essentially the last resort way to salvage something. You can't save the people, but maybe you can rob the Tyranids of growing stronger by destroying all life before they finish eating it. However, pulling that off mid-invasion is incredibly difficult. Usually, by the time a hive fleet is present, it guards the planet fiercely with its bioships, and any approaching Imperial ships risk being destroyed. So most of the time, once it gets to the feeding stage, that world is done for. It becomes a blighted rock after the Tyranids suck it dry. For the sake of completeness, in extremely rare cases, there have been scenarios where an outside force, say Space Marines or other Xenos armies, intervene at the last moment and defeat the Tyranids on the planet, theoretically saving the world. In those instances, they'd also have to mop up any surviving cultists. There's no scenario where cultists and Imperials suddenly reconcile even if Tyranids are beaten off. The cultists either fight to the last or melt away into hiding again. Actually, that's something to note. If a hive fleet invasion is repelled, but some cultists survive, they might go to ground and the cycle could start over in secret. This happened on planet Ikarthor IV. A massive cult known as the Brotherhood had taken over the planet and paved the way for Hive Fleet Kraken's arrival. The Ultramarines and other forces intervened and managed to defeat that Tyranid invasion after brutal fighting. In the aftermath, the Inquisition did a thorough purge of the cult from Ihar 4 with quite some effort. They were only able to do that cleanup because they won the main battle. If they hadn't, Ihar 4 would have been eaten. Ihar 4 stands as one of those cautionary tales. If not for quick action, that cult nearly delivered a critical world straight into the maw of the Great Devourer. So, what happens when people worship the Tyranids as gods? In summary, they become the architects of their own destruction. They facilitate an alien invasion that will consume them along with everyone else. The planet either falls to all-out war or is stripped of life entirely. In the end, nothing remains of the cultists, except perhaps some drifting spore in space or a footnote in inquisitorial archives. Yet, from their perspective, up until those final moments, they lived with purpose and even joy, believing they were part of a grand cosmic plan. It's a tragic irony, arguably one of the darkest in a setting full of darkness, that devotion and hope could be twisted into a pathway to oblivion. Let's look at a few notable historical incidents to cement these ideas and see the scale of impact Genestealer cults have had in the lore. Case studies. Notable Genestealer Cult Insurrections. Throughout Imperial history, particularly in the later millennia of the 41st millennium, Genestealer cults have caused catastrophic uprisings. We've already referenced a few, but let's recap and add some flavor. The Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor on Gozar Quintus, 680, M41. This mining world was the site of the Imperium's first major realization of what Genestealer cults were. The cult had grown under the guise of a local religion that twisted the imperial creed, even managing to infect the ruling family. By the time the Inquisition caught on, it required a Death Watch Space Marine intervention. Chaplain Ortan Cassius and his kill team fought a harrowing battle through an entire underground colony of cultists. They discovered the cult had spread its taint off-world via merchant shipping, which terrified Imperial authorities, since that meant potentially dozens of other systems might already be compromised. This case is famous because it woke the Imperium up. No longer could any rebellion be taken at face value. The Genestealer threat had to be considered. Cassius himself became obsessed with hunting Genestealers thereafter, founding elite units specifically for Tyranid extermination. Gozar Quintus was essentially purged, but the knowledge gleaned saved other worlds by improving cult detection. For instance, patterns of subtle mutation or behavioral changes in populations were added to the Inquisition's watchfors. The Brotherhood on Ihar 4, 992, M41. As mentioned, Ihar 4 was an important hive world whose entire ruling structure was subverted by a cult calling themselves the Brotherhood. When Hive Fleet Kraken drew near, the cult struck and plunged Ihar 4 into chaos. An inquisitor named Agmar had to call in the Ultramarines chapter to respond. Under the leadership of Marneus Calgar, and with the experience they'd gained from earlier Tyranid wars, the Ultramarines managed to rally the planet's non-infected forces. There were titanic battles. Imagine Ultramarine Terminators breaching Hive city vaults to cleanse cult infestations, or tank regiments engaging swarms of hybrid militia in the ruins of hab blocks. And then, add to that the actual Tyranid organisms pouring in from above. It was a three-way nightmare of Space Marines versus cultists versus Tyranids at points. Ultimately, the Imperials prevailed. Kraken's advance on Ihar 4 was halted, but it was Pyrrhic. The Inquisition had to perform thorough sweeps to ensure no Genestealer traces remained. which likely involved mass executions of any citizenry suspected of contact. Many Imperial lives were lost in the process. Ihar 4 was saved from being devoured, but scars of that rebellion remain in lore as a lesson in just how close a vital world came to falling from within. The War of the Beast, unthinkable war on Terra. M42. This one's dramatic. Holy Terra itself, the heart of the Imperium, supposedly had some Genestealer cult activity around the time the Great Rift, Cicatrix Maledictum, tore the galaxy. Terra was thrown into turmoil by warp storms, the Noctis Aeterna, where the Astronomicon went dark. During that time, all sorts of chaos, both literal and figurative, broke loose: riots, cults, etc. In the mix, it's noted that Genestealer cults were spotted on Terra, leading to something referred to ominously as the Unthinkable War. It's scant on details, but the implication is that even Terra's incomprehensibly dense population had been infiltrated in small pockets. Likely, the sheer security and saturation of Imperial forces on Terra meant these cults were found and destroyed relatively quickly, but not without causing alarm. Terra's high authorities ceded parts of the Hive cities to mob rule just to contain things, and after order was restored, a massive purge, the Primarch Guilliman's scourge, cleansed all cults, xenosectarian or chaos, with extreme prejudice. The takeaway: if cults can sprout on Terra, they can sprout anywhere. Nowhere is truly safe because all it takes is one Genestealer in a cargo hold. This event is a present-day, as of 42nd millennium, concern for the Imperium. It underscores how the turmoil of the galaxy has likely only increased the opportunities for cults to thrive. The Pauper Princes on Vigilus, late M41, continuing into M42. Vigilus was a strategically critical planet acting as a gateway in the post-Rift galaxy. It shows a modern example of a cult interacting with other threats. The Pauper Prince's Genestealer cult had quietly gained a foothold among refugees and underhive folk on Vigilus for decades. When war boss Kruldaka's Orc Speedwa hit the planet and then Abaddon's Chaos invasion followed, the War of Nightmares, Vigilus was in absolute chaos. The Pauper Princes saw the Orc invasion initially as a threat. Orcs will happily kill hybrids as readily as humans, so they prematurely launched their uprising to secure resources like water and roots. They ended up controlling significant portions of Vigilus's infrastructure at one point. Then, when the Chaos forces came, the Imperials were stretched between fighting cultists and fighting Chaos, essentially on two fronts, plus lingering Orcs. In the final outcome, Vigilus remained in Imperial hands but barely, and only because of timely reinforcement from various chapters. The Adepta Sororita, Sisters of Battle, purged many cultists, but even by the end of the published war, some Hive sprawls were effectively lost to Genestealer influence. It's an ongoing mess. Vigilus proved how Genestealer cults can act as opportunists. They are not aligned with Chaos or Orcs, but they'll exploit any distraction to further their own cause. For the Imperium, it's like playing whack-a-mole in a burning building. Other Xenos cults, Orc and Tau examples. While we focus on human societies, Genestealers can infect other species too. The Orcs have had instances of Genestealer-infected clans, colloquially dubbed Genestealer Orcs or Gin Orcs sometimes. Orcs are unusually tough and innately resistant in some ways. Many Orcs will detect something off about an infected peer and bash his head in before it spreads. So Orc Genestealer cults usually don't reach the same refined religious stage. They might just be a mob of mutants that gets put down by other Orcs quickly. That said, On occasion, it's caused large-scale orc civil wars. One famous case, called the Xenos War, saw orcs fighting orcs due to Genestealer corruption, which actually helped the Imperium by weakening an orc empire. As for the Tau, the highly structured and pheromone-controlled Tau society is difficult to infiltrate. Their ethereal caste influence competes with broodmind influence, but at least one Tau sept, Xiim Yen, had Genestealer infestations observed. The Tau likely responded with swift quarantines, given their tech savvy and maybe a bit of quiet cover-up to maintain public order. Eldar, a super tragic case. A craft world called Xai was mentioned to have an entire Genestealer infection. The thought of Eldar, usually very psychically aware, falling to this is nightmarish. One imagines that craft world was doomed, as the infection would spread through their infinity circuit or society rapidly due to close-knit psychic links. If it happened, likely the craft world was later destroyed by the Eldar themselves or by others to prevent further spread. It highlights that no matter how wise or advanced, any society can be brought low by this creeping threat. Each case study underscores the same core pattern: infiltration, subversion, uprising, and either the narrow salvation or utter loss of the world. And every time, the story is a tragedy for the population involved. Even if the Imperium regains control, the death and purge toll is staggering. If the cult wins, well, nobody is left alive to ponder it for long. Conclusion: the ultimate price of heretical hope. In the final tally, what happens when people worship the Tyranids as gods? They unwittingly trade their lives and the life of their entire world for a lie. They become instruments of their own extinction, guided by the false promise of salvation. It's a testament to the depth of desperation and the power of alien corruption that these cults keep arising. In them, we see ordinary beings, men, women, even children clinging to hope in a hopeless universe. But in the grim darkness of the far future, hope itself can be weaponized into the most exquisite tool of destruction. The Genestealer cults turn love, faith, and yearning for a better life into vectors for a cosmic horror to take root. They sing joyous hymns even as the fangs close around them. For the Imperium of Man, Genestealer cults are a cruel mirror, showing how the Imperium's own failures to provide peace or dignity can lead its people to embrace something unimaginably worse. It's often said in the lore that mankind has only the Emperor and must reject all other gods. The tragedy of the cultist is that in trying to find a god who answers their prayers, they found only the Great Devourer wearing a comforting mask. Short but strong closing. In the end, the story of people who worship the Tyranids as gods is a cautionary tale of the 41st millennium, a tale of how easily hope and devotion can be twisted into tools of annihilation. These cultists sought freedom, purpose, and ascension, and for a brief moment they felt they had it. But all they truly achieved was to invite the hungriest predators of the galaxy to their door. Their faith ended in their own consumption. The gods they prayed to never cared, never bargained, never even spoke. They simply fed. And so the cultists' dream of salvation dies in tooth and claw, a final prayer drowned out by the tyrant lords of the stars, feasting on the world. In the grim darkness of this universe, there are many horrifying ends. To be devoured by one's own gods, gods you yourself helped to power, might be the most horrifying of all. Yet as new Jinn rations know only oppression and fear, the cycle begins anew on some distant world, with a single Genestealer's kiss and the spark of a new false hope. Thus concludes our exploration of the Genestealer cult phenomenon. May the lessons of these doomed worshippers not be forgotten. because as long as the Tyranids lurk in the void, the danger of history repeating itself is ever present.